Moving on to the specific alleged plot
Sure.
involving Michael Dwyer, I wanted to ask you. I mean, the government have come out and said this was clearly a plot to kill Evo Morales and his vice president and various of the senior figures. The
Hmm.
opposition have poured water on that, said that's complete nonsense. It's been
Yeah.
a show simply to scare Bolivians into thinking that they're all these evil foreign conspirators.
Hmm.
Have we any? Is there any way of cutting through the political fog and working out who's telling the truth?
Right. Okay. Well, first I should mention that the hotel, the Las Americas, where the Hungarian, Irish, and Croatian nationals were killed, is the hotel that I just came back from about 2 months ago. That's the hotel I stay at when I'm in Santa Cruz, and it's just for your listeners. It's not a very extravagant hotel. It's a hotel that middle class Bolivian business travelers would stay at. In fact, in part because it's not very expensive. It's a kind of modest hotel, fairly centrally located. But what we know is that the three individuals, including Michael Dwyer, were killed in whether it was a shootout or they were shot in their bed. Is another issue, but they were killed during this police operation, and they were found with weapons, money, and other kinds of arms.
Hmm.
Now, the thing about this, I should mention, is that I was in Bolivia in December, in January, and also in the prior summer, our prior summer, and almost on a weekly basis, a cache of arms was discovered linked to either the government and its attempts to destroy the opposition, or linked to the opposition in its attempts to thwart, for example, the referendum that happened last summer on the president, then the Constitution. So this event, which is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, there's no question that this takes that history to a new level and takes this long line of events to a qualitatively different level. Takes place in a context in which Bolivia is absolutely racked by controversy
Right.
and
And when you
conspiracy.
say arms caches were discovered, do you mean that they were suspects planted, or that they were
Well,
found to
this is
be lots
this
of different groups plotting different armed insurrections?
this is impossible. This is impossible to know.
Okay.
I mean, there was a shipment of weapons which were discovered on someone who had been who was caught after he and a team this is several months ago, had attempted to blow up a television station in a part of the country which is linked to the opposition, another part, not Santa Cruz, but another part of the country. And the kind of weapons which were discovered with him were weapons which only belonged to the Bolivian military, and he, in fact, he himself was a current member of the Bolivian military. So we know on the side of the government that there seems to be there have been links to the Bolivian military and the government on that side. Now, on the side of the opposition, it's a much more diffuse situation. But I should just tell you this, as
Hmm.
someone who's been to Bolivia many times, years and years since 1996, I would want to know what a Hungarian, Croatian, and Irish national were doing in Santa Cruz de la Sierra. What they were doing. I think
Okay.
that's
It's
a
not. You're saying it's not a popular tourist area, or it's unusual for people.
yes.
Of,
I would say that what I always tell people is that when I encounter Westerners, for example, if I meet an American at a bar in Santa Cruz, and this has happened to me scores of times, as I begin the conversation as an anthropologist, probing for information, in a sort of gentle way, more likely than not, he is working for U.S. Army Special Forces, the Drug Enforcement Administration, or is an quote-unquote attaché with the embassy, Reed member, agent with the CIA.
right.
So Santa Cruz, there's no question that Santa Cruz is not a tourist destination. It is. There are some very lovely Jesuit missions in the area where people, and it is a town that people go to who are on what we call the Gringo Trail. I mean, people who have the Lonely Planet guidebooks and they're traveling around, bumming around South America, and certainly one meets many Irish young people on the Gringo Trail. There's no question about that. But
Hmm.
I would want to know, was Michael Dwyer on the Gringo Trail? Was he a traveler who just happened to hook up with a Croatian and a Hungarian, and they were on their way to the Jesuit missions the next day, and they were gunned down in their hotel room? I don't. That doesn't seem to be the
Hmm.
case.
Well, I was going to ask you is, I mean, the opposition have tried to claim this is all this essentially was some horrific government stunt, that the government shot these guys and then said, oh look, they were trying to kill the president, and it's all nonsense, and it's all designed to scare the poor of Bolivia into thinking that all these foreign mercenaries floating around.
Yeah.
Does that accusation by the opposition carry any water for you? Does it sound credible to you, or does it sound fantastical?
Here's the thing: is that for the last, I would say, 6 months, and it just happens to overlap with the different trips I've made to Bolivia. And I typically live in La Paz, but the last time I was living in Santa Cruz and some other cities, is that there have been hints. Every once in a while, a government minister will say that the government is working on investigating an alleged plot to assassinate the president, and he's made comments about this time and time again in press conferences and so on. And when pressed for facts, the issue just tends to die away. So it hasn't been something which has gotten a lot of credence, I think in part because people think it's extraordinary, and even given how violent Bolivia is, the idea of assassinating a democratically elected president seems to be outside of the realm of possibility. But there's no question that he has been talking about that. Now, the thing is, whether that has any credence or not, it's impossible to know. And would a foiled assassination plot against Evo Morales help the Morales government? Absolutely.
Right.
And here's why. Because as it turns out, on September 11th, 2008, there was a massacre of up to 20 indigenous activists in an Amazonian department in which the victims were tortured. They were executed, and there were at least 20 victims. Stories of bodies dumped in the river. It was a horrendous incident. This happened around 3 or 4 months before the vote on the Constitution. At that moment, on September 11th, the steam went completely out of the opposition, and that event is linked with the success of the Constitution in January, and what is generally considered and what is written about in Bolivia as the fragmented nature of the opposition.
These things are impossible to know definitively, and it's a very murky world that we're talking about. But if I were to ask you as somebody who's spent a lot of time in Santa Cruz, hanging out with various right-wing groups and opposition groups, if I were to ask you for your gut instinct, does your gut instinct tell you that this was a stunt by the government in an attempt to make Morales seem under threat and therefore scare Bolivians into voting for Morales? Or does it look like there was some kind of plot that either knowingly or unknowingly Michael Dwyer got involved in, and that plot went badly wrong, and that's why the shootout that took place happened? What's your gut instinct?
Yeah, well, my gut instinct tells me that the right-wing opposition in Santa Cruz is led by someone called Branko Marinkovic, and he is a Bolivian of Croatian origin who I have talked about and who is to the far right of the opposition. He is the leader of the right wing in Santa Cruz. He himself is connected to someone called John Cava in Sucre, and both of these groups have connections to a neo-Nazi movement in Bolivia, which is linked to neo-Nazis in Spain. Now, I say that in order to tell you that even though the right-wing opposition, clouds itself, covers itself in the rhetoric of ideology, in the ideology of liberty and autonomy, demonstrably they practice a much different kind of political ideology, which is cloaked in racism, the use of violence, a very militaristic rhetoric. This is absolutely essential to understanding them. So ideologically, I would not put it past them to begin to take steps to begin a more violent response. And why is that the case? Because all of their so-called peaceful democratic attempts to thwart the Morales revolution have failed. And what we know is that Morales will be elected in 2009 for another term of 5 years. So they will have Evo Morales for 6-7 years for the foreseeable future. So there's clearly a
motivation to get rid of him and try and
a sense of desperation.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I say that just as background. I don't have obviously any facts either way.
Sure. No, listen, I asked for a gut instinct, and that's what you give us. Mark Goodale, author of Dilemmas of Modernity and professor at George Mason University, thank you so much for speaking to us here on The Third Eye.